The 2nd day of November, 1887. That was the day the world became glass. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, each inhale a drawing of fine, sharp needles into the lungs. The sky was the color of a dull pewter plate, heavy and low. Mr. Hemlock did not knock. The door to our cabin, the one my husband built with his own hands before the fever took him, was pushed open without ceremony. A gust of wind, a swirl of fine, dry snow, and then the man himself, filling the frame. He was not a large man, but he carried the weight of the town council, of bylaws and ledgers, and that made him immense. He held a paper in his gloved hand. My mother, propped in her chair by the hearth where a meager fire struggled, did not look up. She continued her mending, her needle moving with a steadiness her body no longer truly possessed. I was scrubbing the floorboards, the lye water stinging my raw knuckles. I rose slowly, wiping my hands on my apron, and waited. He did not like silence. It forced him to speak first. "The council has reached a decision," he said, his voice flat, devoid of pity or warmth. It was the voice he used for reading commodity prices. "As you have no male head of household and your tithes are in arrears, this claim is hereby declared forfeit. You have until sundown to vacate the premises." He extended the paper. I did not take it. It was a notice of eviction, a death sentence written in neat, bureaucratic script. The ink was a frozen black against the stark white. My husband's name was on it, crossed out. Mine was written underneath. A simple, administrative violence. I looked past him, through the open door, to where our milk cow, Daisy, stood in her lean-to, her warm breath pluming in the crystalline air. She was all we had left of value. "The cow is considered property of the settlement," he added, as if reading my thoughts. "To be sold to cover your debt." My mother's needle stopped. She looked at him then, her eyes, clouded with age, were suddenly as sharp and clear as ice. "A man who mistakes a ledger for a soul is a man already buried," she said, her voice a dry rustle. Mr. Hemlock's face tightened. He disliked aphorisms even more than silence. He placed the paper on the table. "Sundown," he repeated, and turned, pulling the door shut behind him, leaving the cold to settle back into its rightful place. I looked at my mother, at her frailness, the bird-like bones of her wrists. I looked at the dying fire. Sundown. In this cold, sundown was not an hour. It was a finality. I nodded once, to myself. I would not beg. I would not explain. I put another log on the fire, a small act of defiance. Then I began to pack. The journey was a slow, brutal prayer. I wrapped Mother in every blanket we owned, a cocoon of wool and worn cotton, and then I lifted her. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of twigs and memory, but the dead weight of her helplessness was immense. I secured her to my back with rope, her head lolling against my shoulder, her faint breaths warming a small patch on my neck. Daisy followed without needing to be led, her bell silent, stuffed with a rag. She was my witness, my collaborator, a steady, warm presence in a world gone cold and sharp. We did not look back at the settlement. To look back would be to acknowledge we had something to lose. We had already lost it. The only direction was forward, into the teeth of the wind, into the vast, indifferent white of the plains rising toward the jagged teeth of the mountains. The snow was knee-deep, and each step was a plunge, a breaking of crust, a fight against the sucking cold. The wind scoured my face, peeling away warmth, then feeling. My cheeks went numb, then my nose, my ears. I pulled my scarf tighter, tasting wool and frozen breath. My focus narrowed to the next step, and the one after that. The rhythm of my own labor was the only thing that kept me sane. Lift the foot. Plunge. Drag. Breathe. The weight of Mother was a constant, grounding reality. She was the reason for this impossible march. I could have left her. The thought was a flicker of black ice in my mind, and I crushed it instantly. We were a unit. Her mind, my body. Her stillness, my motion. We would survive together, or not at all. For hours, we moved like this, a three-part creature crawling across a frozen world. Daisy's brown hide was a patch of earth in the overwhelming white. As the pewter sky began to darken toward slate, a deeper cold fell. This was the cold that found its way into your bones, the cold that stopped a man's heart. Hope was a dangerous luxury, but I scanned the landscape, the rolling drifts, the outcroppings of stone. And then I saw it. Not a promise, just a possibility. A shadow against a low cliff face, a darkness that was not a rock or a drift. A place where the snow did not lie. A mouth. A cave. It was a long way off, but it was something. It was a destination. I adjusted Mother's weight on my back and changed my course, aiming for that small patch of black in the endless, killing white. The entrance was low and wide, partially obscured by a curtain of ancient, frozen ivy. The air that breathed out from it was cold, but it was a different kind of cold. It was a still, subterranean chill, free of the wind's relentless knife. It smelled of damp stone, of deep earth, and something else. Faintly, of wood smoke, so old it was almost part of the rock itself. I eased Mother from my back, propping her against a boulder just inside the entrance while I led Daisy in. The cow was hesitant, her wide eyes reflecting the dying light, but she trusted me, and the promise of shelter from the wind was a language any creature could understand. The cave was not deep, but it was vast. The ceiling soared up into darkness, and the main chamber was the size of a small barn, littered with the debris of ages, fallen rock, animal bones, the dust of centuries. In the center of this main space, I saw it. A circle of blackened stones. A hearth. Someone had lived here before. Lived, not just sheltered. This was not a den. It was a home, abandoned. I settled Mother near the cold hearth, unwrapping her layers. Her face was pale, her lips tinged with blue, but her eyes were alert. They took in the soaring darkness, the sheer rock walls, the promise of this place. I had to work fast. The sun was gone, and the temperature was plummeting. The first priority was fire. The second was wood. And the third was everything else. I left Mother with Daisy, whose body heat would offer some small comfort, and went back out into the twilight. The cliff face offered a small mercy. In its lee, the wind had been less severe, and a stand of gnarled, dead pines clung to the rock. Their lower branches were thick with dry, seasoned wood, snapped by the weight of past snows. I broke them off with my hands, the sharp cracks echoing in the frozen stillness. I worked with a frantic, desperate energy, gathering armful after armful, piling it just inside the cave mouth until I had a mound as tall as my waist. My muscles screamed, my lungs burned, but I did not stop. As I was dragging in the last load, my boot caught on something half buried in the snow and dirt at the back of the cave. It was a small, oilskin-wrapped bundle. I tugged it free. Inside was a book, a journal, its leather cover cracked with age but its pages preserved. The handwriting was tight and spidery. It began, October 12, 1853. The trapping is poor, but this cave will serve. I will make my stand against the winter here. I had found a ghost. A mentor. A manual for survival. The journal became my scripture. The trapper, whose name was never written, had documented everything. He wrote of the way the smoke drew, the best place to find dry standing wood, the peculiarities of the cave's drafts. His first entry on the hearth was a godsend. The draw is poor until the flue stone is hot, he'd written. A small, fast fire first, to warm the passage, then you can build it. Following his ghost words, I laid the kindling. I used the last of our matches, shielding the precious, sputtering flame with my cupped hands. It caught. A small tongue of orange licked at the dry pine needles, then the twigs. Smoke billowed out into the cave, thick and choking. For a terrible moment, I thought I would fail, that we would be smoked out into the killing cold. I nearly panicked. But I trusted the trapper. I fed the fire, let it grow hotter, fiercer. The smoke swirled, then, as if a switch had been thrown, it wavered and began to pull upwards, a thin, steady stream vanishing into a crack in the ceiling I hadn't even seen. The flue stone was hot. I began to add larger pieces of wood, the ones I had hauled until my arms felt torn from their sockets. The fire grew, a living, breathing creature in the heart of the stone. It pushed back the darkness. It pushed back the cold. Warmth, real warmth, began to radiate outwards. I brought Mother closer, her chair scraping on the stone floor. The color began to return to her cheeks. She held her hands out to the flames, a silent gesture of thanks. Daisy shifted behind us, her soft exhalations now visible in the warm air around the fire. The light danced on the cave walls, revealing their texture, the subtle colors in the rock, the way they curved up into an impenetrable ceiling of black. This was no longer just a hole in the ground. It was a sanctuary. For the next 2 days, my life fell into a simple, brutal rhythm. Feed the fire. Fetch more wood. Melt snow for water. Milk Daisy. My world was the circle of firelight, the weight of the axe, the taste of warm milk. In the evenings, by the flickering light, I read the journal. The trapper was a practical man, his entries short and to the point. He described building a rock wall to block the wind from the entrance, and I did the same, hauling stones until my back felt broken, mortaring them with mud and melted snow that froze into a solid mass. He wrote of the inner chill, the way the stone itself leached warmth from the body. A man can freeze to death 10 feet from a roaring fire if he's sleeping on the rock, he wrote. You need wood under you. Better yet, a box of wood around you. He had given me my next task. I would build us a house inside our house. The trapper's words echoed in my mind. A box of wood. It was an immense task. The trees near the cave were mostly deadfall, good for the fire but too rotten for building. For structural wood, I had to venture further out, into a grove of younger, straighter lodgepole pines that grew in a shallow, sheltered valley about a half-mile away. Each trip was a calculated risk. I would leave Mother by the fire, a heap of blankets with a pail of milk and a stack of wood beside her, and set out with the axe and rope. The cold was a constant predator. I learned to read the sky, to feel the subtle shifts in the wind that signaled a coming storm. I never stayed out long. Felling a tree was a slow, grinding process. The axe was heavy, my muscles unused to this kind of sustained violence against wood. The rhythmic thud of the blade against the trunk was a conversation between my will and the tree's resistance. When a tree finally gave way, it was with a great tearing groan and a crash that shattered the frozen silence. The work had only just begun. I would limb it, then cut the trunk into manageable lengths, 10 or 12 feet long. Getting them back to the cave was the true test. I would haul them, one at a time, dragging them over the snow, my boots slipping, my lungs heaving. The rough bark tore at my mittens and my hands. Each log was a victory. Each log was a wall, a roof, a bed. Back in the cave, the firelight turned my labor into a kind of theater. I used the trapper's own abandoned tools, which I'd found in a small side chamber, a rusty saw, an adze, an auger. I notched the logs, fitting them together as my husband had taught me when we built our first cabin. The work was slow, methodical. Saw, chop, fit. Saw, chop, fit. The scent of fresh-cut pine filled the cavern, a clean, sharp smell that cut through the damp stone and smoke. I was not just building a shelter. I was building a new self. The woman who had scrubbed floors and waited for a man from the council to decide her fate was gone. In her place was this creature of muscle and will, her body hardened by the cold, her hands calloused by the axe. The walls of the small cabin rose slowly, a rectangle of pale, raw wood within the vast, dark grey of the cave. I built it just big enough for 2 sleeping platforms and a small space to sit, positioned to capture the radiant heat of the fire. When I finally laid the last roof beam, I felt no elation, only a quiet, deep satisfaction. I had built a fortress. And just in time. The sky was turning a bruised, ominous yellow. The trapper had a name for it. The snowblink. The harbinger of the great blizzards. The storm arrived not with a roar but with a whisper. A sudden, eerie silence fell over the world. The wind died completely. The air grew thick, heavy. Then, the first flakes began to fall. They were not the fine, dry crystals of the earlier snows, but huge, wet, and heavy, like pieces of torn cotton. Within an hour, the world outside the cave mouth was a churning, white chaos. The wind came back, this time with a deep, mournful howl that seemed to rise from the center of the earth. It was a sound of immense power, a force that could strip wood from bone and scour the landscape clean. But inside our cave, inside our small wooden box, we were safe. The rock wall I had built at the entrance took the brunt of the wind, which shrieked and moaned as it was torn apart on the stones. Drifts began to pile up against it, sealing us in further, insulating us from the fury outside. Life became a simple, enclosed loop. The world shrank to the size of our cabin, the glow of the fire, the steady presence of my mother, and the quiet warmth of Daisy, who was sheltered in the main part of the cavern. Days and nights blurred. Time was measured only by the needs of the fire. I kept it fed constantly, a hungry god in the center of our universe. I milked Daisy, the warm, frothy milk, a luxury, a miracle. We drank it heated, a comfort against the deep, resonant cold of the stone that surrounded us. I read more of the trapper's journal, his words a link to another human soul who had weathered this same isolation. He wrote of loneliness, of the way the cave could play tricks on the mind in the dead of winter. He mentioned a rumor, a story from the Ute people who had used this place before him. They believed the cave went deeper, that a warm spring lay somewhere in the rock, a secret heart to the mountain. Never found it, he wrote on his last page. Perhaps it is only a story to keep a man digging when he should be sleeping. The thought of it, a place of warmth hidden in the deep stone, was a seed planted in my mind. During the long hours, I would listen. Past the howl of the wind, past the crackle of the fire, I thought I could sometimes hear a faint, rhythmic dripping, a sound of water in the deep dark. Was it the spring? Or was it just the trapper's madness, passed down to me through his inked words? The storm raged for 6 days. On the 7th, the wind finally broke. An exhausted silence fell. I clawed my way through the drift at the cave mouth and looked out upon a changed world. The landscape had been remade, buried under a mountain of new snow, sculpted into fantastic shapes by the wind. The settlement was miles away, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than the wind, that it could not have survived this. A week after the great blizzard ended, I heard a sound. A desperate, human sound, half shout, half sob, cutting through the profound silence. I took the rifle my husband had left me, and not because I was a hunter, but because the weight of it was a comfort, and went to the mouth of the cave. A figure was stumbling through the immense drifts, a dark shape against the blinding white. He was crawling more than walking, collapsing every few feet. As he drew closer, I recognized him. It was not Mr. Hemlock. It was a man named Peterson, a blacksmith, a man who had stood silently in the council meetings, his face impassive, while my fate was decided. He had a wife and 2 small children. He saw me and raised a hand, then fell to his knees. I walked out to meet him, the packed snow crunching under my boots. His face was a mask of frozen tears and desperation. His lips were cracked and bleeding. "Help us," he rasped, his voice shredded. The town or the roofs came down. The snow, so many. He gestured vaguely back the way he had come. "My family, we are in a snow hollow. We will not last another night." I stood there, looking down at him. This man who had watched me be cast out. He had a home, a trade, a vote. He had done nothing. He had let the ledger and the law do their cold work. The wind picked up, blowing fine snow like sand across the drifts. It would be so easy to turn my back. To say no. To give him the same mercy he had given me. The fire was my fire. The shelter was my shelter. The milk was my milk. I had earned it with my own 2 hands, with my own pain. I looked back toward the warmth of the cave, where my mother sat today. I knew what she would say without her speaking a word. She had taught me that strength was not in vengeance. It was in endurance. It was in building when others destroyed. I looked back at the man. His eyes were pleading, stripped of all pride. He was no longer a blacksmith or a councilman. He was just a man, a father, trying to keep his children from freezing to death. The memory of Mr. Hemlock's flat, merciless voice was a cold stone in my gut. But the memory of my mother's hand, steadying mine, was warmer. "Bring them," I said. The words tasted like ash and forgiveness in my mouth. "But you will work. You will haul wood and you will haul water. There are no passengers here." He began to weep, his shoulders shaking. He nodded, unable to speak. I turned and walked back to my cave, to tell my mother we were about to have company. He brought them that afternoon. His wife, Mary, was hollow-eyed with exhaustion, carrying their youngest, a little girl bundled so tightly only her eyes were visible. Their son, no older than 7, trudged behind, his face grim. They stared at the cave, at the fire, at the impossible wooden cabin within the stone, as if they were seeing a vision. They had expected, I think, a smoky hole. They found a home. I gave them warm milk and a place by the fire and said nothing more. The next day, as promised, I put Peterson to work. He was a strong man, and his desperation made him tireless. With 2 of us hauling wood, the pile grew into a small mountain. Mary helped my mother, her hands quick and capable, and she brought a quiet, grateful presence to our small space. They spoke little of the town, and I did not ask. The story came out in pieces, in hushed tones not meant for me to hear. Roofs collapsing under the weight. Families trapped. The storehouse, poorly built, was one of the first to go, its supplies buried under 20 feet of snow. Of Mr. Hemlock, they said nothing at all. 2 other families found us in the following week, guided by the thin, steady plume of smoke rising from the hidden flue. A farmer and his wife. A young couple. Our cave became an ark. Crowded, loud, but alive. I was no longer a pariah. I was the provider, the center of this small, broken community. They looked to me for direction, and I gave it. I organized the work, rationed the food, settled the small disputes that arose from fear and close quarters. The journal, the trapper's wisdom, became our law. When the great thaw finally began, weeks later, we walked back to the settlement together. It was a ruin. A field of wreckage and mounds of snow that I knew covered more than just collapsed buildings. Mr. Hemlock's house, the largest in the settlement, had been built on a small rise. The wind had scoured it, peeling the roof back like a can lid. He was standing outside it, staring at the wreckage. His authority, his certainty, his ledgers, all of it buried and broken. He looked up as we approached, a small column of survivors walking out of the wilderness. His eyes found mine. I saw confusion, then shock, then a dawning, terrible understanding. He had cast me out to die, and I had returned with his town on my back. I did not slow my pace. I did not speak a word. I met his gaze, held it for a single, long moment, and then I walked past him, my head held high, leaving him alone with the consequences of his cold, brittle world. Spring arrived, not as a gentle promise, but as a messy, violent birth. The snow melted into a torrent of slush and mud. The world smelled of wet earth and decay. We buried our dead. We salvaged what we could from the wreckage of the town. The survivors, the ones who had sheltered in my cave, began to rebuild, but they did not rebuild around the old center. They built near the cliff, near the cave that had saved them. It had become our anchor. My mother had weakened during the long winter. The cold had settled deep in her bones, and the coming of the warmth did not seem to touch her. She spent her days sitting in her chair, placed just outside the cave mouth in the pale spring sun. She watched the rebuilding, her face calm and placid. She had seen enough winters. One evening, as the sun was setting, painting the wet landscape in hues of rose and gold, she called me to her side. Her voice was a bare thread of sound. "He will come," she said. I knew who she meant. Mr. Hemlock. "He will ask for your forgiveness." I said nothing. I did not know if I had any to give. "Do not give it to him," she whispered, her fingers gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "It is not yours to give. Forgiveness is for God. You are here to build. Let him carry his own stones." Her eyes held mine. They were clear again, as they had been that day he cast us out. You did not break, she said. You became the stone. They will build around you now. Those were her last words to me. She closed her eyes, and her breath, which had been so faint, simply stopped. I sat with her as the stars came out, the vast, cold, and beautiful stars of the high plains. I felt a grief so profound it was like the cave itself, a hollow space inside me. But it was not a grief of despair. It was the grief of a finished thing, of a life lived completely. The next morning, Peterson helped me bury her on the rise overlooking the new settlement, a place where she could watch the sun rise. I took the trapper's journal, his story of solitary survival, and on the first blank page, I began to write our story. I wrote of my mother's strength, of the blizzard, of the cave becoming an ark. The book was no longer a ghost's monologue. It was becoming a testament, a record for the new life we were building from the ruins of the old. It was a legacy. The fire still burns in that hearth. Not my fire, anymore. It belongs to the town now. The cave is a landmark, a place of pilgrimage for the children, who hear the story of the great blizzard and the widow who walked out of the snow. They call it the Mother Cave now. This journal is thick, heavy with the entries of many hands. It holds the records of births and deaths, of harvests and hard winters. It has become the soul of our town, the ledger my mother spoke of, one that accounts for human hearts, not just debts and credits. Mr. Hemlock did come, just as she said he would. He was a stooped, broken man. He tried to speak of absolution, of making amends. I remembered my mother's words. I did not offer him forgiveness. I did not offer him condemnation. I offered him a shovel. I told him the wall on the west side of the new storehouse needed finishing before the next rains. He took it. He worked until his hands bled. He died 2 winters later and was buried alongside the others. His stones were finally carried. I am an old woman now. My hands are gnarled, my face a map of sun and wind and time. I see the world from the same chair my mother once sat in. I watch the children play, and I see the strength in the walls of the houses, in the faces of the people who built them. They are not brittle. They know what it is to endure. And you who have heard this story, you live in a world of ledgers and laws, of doors that can be closed with the stroke of a pen. You have your own settlements, your own councils, your own quiet, comfortable cabins. You have stood by while notices were served. You have watched others be led out into the cold. So I ask you, look around at the walls you have built for yourself. Look at the doors you lock at night. Who have you shut out? Whose survival have you deemed not your responsibility? And when your winter comes, when the wind howls and the roof begins to groan under the weight of it all, who will be left to lead you out of the snow?